Cutbacks in the education budget will include a 5% reduction in all capitation grants to schools, an increase in third-level student fees and new charges for post-leaving cert students. Our education correspondent Emma Kelly has been looking at how children and students will be affected. What can you tell us, Emma?
Brian, two, I have to say, already vulnerable groups of children who will be virtually immediately hit are traveller children and the children of immigrants. This plan does envisage a reduction in teacher numbers. 1,200 posts will be suppressed. They, by and large, will not be mainstream teachers. They will be support teachers, including resource teachers for travellers to be withdrawn and a phased reduction of language support teachers. On the issue of pupil-teacher ratio, that's class size, numbers are to be maintained as is for a year, but the government has committed itself to increasing class size in subsequent years unless the teacher unions can come up with a better idea. Now, on students, a 500 increase in fees for next year. There will be further increases in subsequent years, perhaps substantial. The exact form has yet to be worked out. It could be a loan system, for example. Student grants also to be cut, 50 million saving there, we don't know how. And also, finally, for post-leaving certificate students, a fee of €200.
Emma Kelly, thank you very much for that.
Well, the key question already being asked is, will the plan work? The scale of the cutbacks and the higher taxes will mean consumer spending and economic growth will be slow. But the government says this will be offset by steps to make Ireland more competitive. Our business editor David Murphy looks at the economic forecasts contained in the plan.
This plan is based on a number of assumptions regarding what's going to happen in the economy over the next 4 years. It says it believes the domestic economy will expand by about 1% next year and 2.5% between then and 2014. But if those assumptions are wrong, this plan is in trouble before it begins.
If you look at the signs in the export sector and the industrial output figures, it does suggest the economy is turning round, the export sector. And eventually you'll see a return to growth. I think that next year is not going to be a great year when you take $6 billion out of the economy.
The plan says unemployment will remain above 13% next year and will only drop below 10% in 2014. It estimates jobs growth will return, but only modestly. Employment will grow by 1.5% every year over the lifetime of the plan. In 4 years' time, 1/5 of taxes will go simply to pay interest on Ireland's borrowings. Most of that money comes from people outside Ireland, but today's plan suggests a number of initiatives so Irish people can help lend money to run the country. Pension funds will be encouraged to invest in Irish government bonds. Consumers will be offered a new 4-year savings product by the National Treasury Management Agency. But the cost of recapitalising Anglo-Irish, Irish Nationwide and EBS will be €2.4 billion annually by 2014. Not included in the plan is the interest bill for the bank bailout facility from the IMF and EU. That will vary depending on how much money the government draws down. That will have to be paid for from further savings if Ireland wants to meet today's targets. David Murphy, RTE News.
For his analysis, we're joined now by our economics correspondent Sean Whelan. Sean, a lot of pain in this for a lot of people, and the whole report is predicated on this growth projection, 2.75% over the next 4 years.
Yeah, indeed, Sharon. I mean, if we don't have growth, all the rest of it will start to fall apart. Trying to close this gap of the budget deficit, you can tax people so much, you can cut spending so much, but really you've got to have growth in the economy to do a lot of the heavy lifting for you. And they are aiming at trying to get people back to work, get people off of social welfare. That lightens the load on the taxpayer. It also turns people who were receiving social welfare into people who will contribute taxes. But that's not going to happen without economic growth. And people are looking at these growth figures, 2.75%, and saying, is it a bit optimistic? Certainly internationally they think it is. Some of the commentators here say, well, you know, we've done this sort of thing before and the Irish economy works in mysterious ways. You never know, it might work out for us. Even the ESRI had a high growth scenario, which saw growth going at a higher level than 2.75%. So, you know, maybe it'll work out, maybe it won't, and that's one of the fears that are out there. Also, you know, we can do what we can do, But if our main driver of growth is international exports, we've no control over the international economy. If that starts to weaken and falter again, then our growth projections are going to be damaged. So it's a lot of external factors, are things that are beyond our control, are going to affect this plan.
So looking at the plan, well, what are the growth dimensions? What are the stimulus dimensions to sustain that 2.75% projection?
Well, the lack of stimulus, as certainly the trade unions would say, they're pretty steamed at this, that there wasn't any signs of large-scale spending in the economy. But then, of course, the government doesn't have any money. So how can they spend it? Well, the unions had suggested ways of trying to draw in private sector involvement, using pension funds, private sector pension funds, as well as the National Pension Reserve Fund. There is a little bit of money coming out of National Pension Reserve Fund, but not a huge amount. The main stimulus measures in it seem to be the unpleasant kind of stimulus measures, which is cut the social welfare budget, cut dole payments to people specifically to encourage them to just take lower paid jobs basically at any price, and also to cut minimum wage to try and get employers to take more people on and lighten the load on employers and try and match the general shrinking of the economy by a general shrinking of the expenditure in the state. Whether that's enough to actually generate growth, generate employment in particular, remains to be seen. But employment is the key measure of success or failure of this. It's the unemployment rate over the next few years. It's the only yardstick by which this plan is worth measuring.
All right, Sean Whelan, thank you.
Opposition parties have criticised the government's plan, saying it doesn't do enough to generate economic growth and that its growth targets are over-optimistic. The Fine Gael leader Enda Kenny said his party would publish its own budgetary plan next week and had already discussed with the European Commission the possibility of the four-year plan being renegotiated by an incoming government.
Publishing a four-year plan is all very well, but with the government's days numbered, it's likely others will have to implement it. And the main opposition party said it wouldn't be bound by the plan, as it has already discussed with Brussels.
The Commission have made it perfectly clear that in the event of the people voting for a change of government early in the new year, that it would be possible for a new government to negotiate, discuss or change any individual policy position that is in this document here.
Fine Gael criticised the lack of detail on the banks in advance of agreements with the IMF and the ECB.
As those announcements are made, the top line figures in this document will change. So in terms of giving an overview of the economy, it's a document which is quite temporary in nature without the banking input.
Labour, meanwhile, criticised the lack of a growth strategy.
We have to have ambition for growth in Ireland to have economic recovery. I mean, it's the bit of growth in this document that will give people hope, because there's a lot of pain for a lot of different people. And, you know, the document has to balance the pain with hope and with prospects of growth. Yeah.
Sinn Féin also critical of the government's strategy and saying it's time for the people to have their say.
They have now published their plan. They should suspend the budget planned for the 7th of December and they should go and call a general election immediately.
The government had hoped for all-party support for its four-year plan. It certainly hasn't got that. There are differences in approach between the opposition parties, but they do all agree on one thing. They say this plan doesn't do enough to promote economic growth. David McCullough, RTE News, Leinster House.
The EU Commissioner for Economic Affairs, Olli Rehn, has welcomed the government plan, saying it was an important contribution to stabilising the public finances. However, Portuguese and Spanish bond yields continue to rise today as fears continue over the risk to the single currency posed by the Irish banking crisis.
Contagion from the Irish crisis continues to threaten. In Portugal, the biggest general strike in 20 years brought transport to a standstill, closed schools, banks and affected the health sector. Today, Portugal's bond yield spreads above German bunds stood at an all-time high. While Portugal's toughest budget in decades will be unveiled on Friday, all eyes were on Dublin and the government's four-year budget plan. Tonight, in an interview with Finnish television, the EU Commissioner, Olli Rehn, welcomed the plan, saying it struck the right balance between tax increases and spending cuts, and that it would be the cornerstone of the EU-IMF programme. He added he was watching the markets closely.
Here we can see a certain systemic challenge against the euro. And of course, our goal, and we will do our utmost in order to stop this contagion effect.
But how to stop that contagion? In an earlier poll, 34 out of 50 analysts said Portugal would need a bailout, followed by Spain, which today saw its bond yields rise once again. The sense of contagion now gripping the Eurozone is such that it appears unlikely that, however harsh the four-year budget appears to ordinary Irish people, it may not be sufficient to radically restore calm to the markets in the short term. Tony Connolly, RTE News, Brussels.
Well, around the country, people have been giving their reaction to what was announced this afternoon. Not surprisingly, most were unhappy and fearful for the future.
4 people from different walks of life gathering in Waterford to watch the announcement. Bridget from Larchville in the city is on disability. Her husband is her carer. They survive on €190 a week. She's furious.
To put meters in to people that have no money.
And how can you afford to live at the moment?
We can't. We're barely existing. You're going out to a shopping centre, you're looking for the cheapest thing is on the shelf. You have to make a stew to last you 2 or 3 days a week.
What about a property tax?
Oh, the property tax can go out the window.
Dennis is a pensioner from South Kilkenny who worked with the VEC for 43 years.
An ordinary person in the street can run their affairs properly. And surely to God, our people, the brains of the country, could do the same job with the country.
Regina, a businesswoman in charge of a renting agency in Waterford, thinks the Croke Park agreement needs to be revisited and says VAT increases will hurt.
That's going to be a bitter pill to swallow because I don't think we're going to be able to pass over those charges to our customers, and I think we'll end up suffering that cost.
Dahi is principal of the Gaelscoil in Tramore, which has been waiting 25 years for a permanent building.
There's going to be very few jobs, and it's going to be left up to the people who are at the moment in the public service to take the slack and to bear the brunt of these cuts, because I don't think people in the public service are into reducing service.
Damien Tiernan, RTE News, Waterford.